Thank you, Sophia. I hope we can all hear me, and thank you for attending this presentation. I'm very new in this platform, so I don't know if the slides will appear automatically or if I need to upload them. Do they appear automatically? Sorry, I don't see any slides here.
Claudia, sorry, I took over to show you. If you see where where you can see the slides, there are arrows on the right. So by moving the arrows, I'll try to get to yours. Oh, sorry. You just move right, and they will keep passing. I'm giving you back the floor now.
Okay, I can see. Okay, I think it's working now. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this study that I'm going to present, it was a study that was commissioned by UN Women. And the authors of the study is myself, is Shravanti Reddy from UN Women, and is also another author called Giles Barton Howen, who did the data science part of this study. And the objective of this study was to understand if big data could be used for evaluations of UN women, particularly to evaluate the contribution of the projects for the human political participation and leadership. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about what is big data and why we should use it for evaluation, what sources of big data can be helpful to evaluate women participation and leadership, and what are the risks and challenges of using big data. And then I will just give you a snapshot of our findings, what is the type of insights we can get from big data, and then some conclusions and recommendations. Okay, so the objectives of this study is, this is a feasibility study, and we just wanted to understand what will be possible. We were not just assuming that big data can be used for evaluation. We know that there are several aspects that we need to consider and shortcomings in terms of representativeness, but we wanted to understand what is possible and where the boundaries are. So we also wanted to understand if it was possible to triangulate this data with other types of data that UN Women had already, namely data with from focus group discussions, from the site visits. So in that regard, we decide to use two case studies that was the evaluation in Mexico and Pakistan, because there were the countries where there were site visits and other material from fieldwork that you could triangulate big data with. And we also wanted to understand if how can we use big data and to develop a protocol so UN Women and partners could use big data, and we could support the development of this thinking of how can you use big data for evaluation. So what is big data, and now we should use it? So there are different definitions of big data depending on the field that we are applying it. So for evaluation, we think that big data, it can be considered a byproduct of people's digital behavior. So we are assuming that big data is digital data from the behavior of individuals using internet activities. It could be using social media, it can be e-governance, it can be finance, it can be commerce. So everything that will leave a digital trace. So big data also requires interpretation after the event, as opposed to other types of data that are more designed. So big data in this way is organic, so it is not collected, gathered with a purpose in mind, or the purpose is very different from the purpose when you're using it for evaluation. So there's also another aspect related with big data, that is that imperfectly matches the entire universe of cases. So we don't rely with sampling. We know that we can work with a population, but this population is not the full population we may be interested in. So we have a subset of this target population. So we need to understand what are these exclusions when you are using big data. So yeah, non-coverage is always a concern. And big data is timely, so it's often accessible in near time. So I wouldn't say real time because big data needs some time to be processed. And the best way to use big data is combine it with different data sources. So you can have some conclusions that can be validated or contradicted by other data sources that you can make sense of what the data is telling you only by contrasting with other data sources. And big data has some potential and some value because it can help in terms of evaluation and decision making, but is also often a challenge to translate the findings from big data into value for organizations. Okay, so sorry. Okay, it's this slide. Okay, so big data is emerging as a source for evaluation, mainly because it can be used to identify large-scale trends to describe what's happening, but it can be used for predicting. It can be used to predict what will be the outcome of an intervention, and also to understand how and whether interventions have worked. So for description, for explanation, and for prediction. So what are the sources of big data that you use in this study? So we focus on social media data and also radio data. So all types of social data. So we look at Twitter, we look at Facebook, WhatsApp, radio data, news data. And we wrote a report that is available online on UN Women website, where we present the pros and cons of using all these types of data for evaluation. But the main finding is that Twitter is a very good source of data if you're interested in political participation, but it's good for sharing information with others in a quick and public way. Whether Facebook is not as good because Facebook data it reveals more long-lasting interactions and in-depth opinions, but in the context of personal sharing within friendship networks. We also look at WhatsApp data, but we had some technical challenges of getting WhatsApp data because unlike Twitter and Facebook, the API is not publicly available, so this data is not accessible. Then we also look at radio data, and we know that it's possible to leverage big data for evaluation, but it also requires a bit more time to prepare the technology that will allow to record radio data. So in these two case studies that we look at Mexico and Pakistan, particularly in Pakistan, we knew that there was radio data, but there was not recorded in a systematic way. So it would take us, I think, a bit longer than the timeline of this project to get this data. And then we also explore the possibility of using news data. So I've talked about this that we use Twitter to understand political participation in Mexico, and we use Facebook to understand political participation in Pakistan. So what are the risks and challenges in using big data? So we identify certain challenges that would impact, let's say, the quality and the conclusions of evaluation based on gender. So the main problem is elite capture. So elite capture has to do with demographics that be completely missed out due to restricted access and use. For example, we know that Twitter is used mainly by males and young age groups. So this elite capture will lead to a skewed representation of people in our data. Then we have also problem of restricted use. Even if people have access, it doesn't mean that they are using social media in the ways that will be useful for evaluation. There are a number of factors that restrict the women's ability to participate in social media and other interactive platforms that is related with issues of ownership and control. So, for example, in situations of domestic violence, maybe social media or even radio, they can be controlled by the other partner, and people may not feel comfortable to use it even if they have access. So We have also the one issue related with ambient sexism. So ambient sexism is related with perceived misogyny in social media. So it covers everything related with trolling, flaming, threats against women, cyberbullying, but it doesn't. These threats, they don't need to be targeted at users, so it's just perceived. So it's related with this idea that the attitudes and behavior that are prevalent in a negative environment can affect all those in the environment, even if it's not directed at them. So we have problems with platform drifts, as to do with the way that different groups use Twitter or Facebook over time, and also the changes, the technical changes in the platform, that they also imply that the data that we can get on a certain time frame will be different, not because people are using differently, but because of the changes in the platform itself. For example, Facebook can ask, how do you feel today? Or what do you want to share with your friends? And only changing this question, it may impact the information that people will share. And finally, we have the ethical and privacy issues that we took very seriously, and we use the data privacy and ethics protection guidance note from UNDP, and we also use this study as a way to understand what will be the main challenges in terms of privacy and ethical challenges. So the method, so we look at the characteristics of this data in Mexico and Pakistan. So we choose Mexico because Mexico is a country with a big uptake of Twitter data, and also because it is one of the countries that UN Women was interested, and we have enough data from other sources of evaluation. And Mexico doesn't pose any challenges in terms of access. 65.3% of the population has internet access. And then we look at Pakistan as a contrasting case, as the two types of archetypes with different types of challenges of internet access and women participation. And although in Pakistan there are some segments of the population that use social media, they are mainly urban. So it means that we use, for example, Twitter in Pakistan, we will miss a whole segment of the population, that are people that live in rural areas. And so we use Facebook because we wanted to use ready data, and I told you that there were some problems in terms of the timeline. We had 3 months to do this study, and this was not enough to get to data. So we just look at Facebook to see what can Facebook tell us. So we select these case studies, and then we review the potential data sources, and then we create and implement a protocol for data extraction and analysis, and then we evaluate the limitations of each data source. So in terms of the method for using big data for evaluation, so we try to describe it as comprehensively as possible, so other people who are interested in use big data, other evaluators could use it. So what is important, I think, is in the first stage, we need to understand what you are getting from the data. So we start in a blank page. We have all these huge data sets, but we don't know where to start. So we can, for example, filter the data sets using certain hashtags or certain keywords, but we need to know these hashtags and keywords are. So I think the first stage is a stage where we need to pay attention of questions of measurement. That, for example, what we did is that we identify what were the hashtags that UN Women in Mexico was using for their campaigns since 2013, and we create a data set from Twitter that was also all the tweets that use this hashtag, not necessarily UN Women or UN Women followers, but everyone in Mexico who was using this hashtag. So the unit of analysis was the tweets with the hashtags. And using the hashtags, we could look at what are the expressions that are most frequently used in these hashtags, and also what are all the hashtags that are associated. So this is an incremental process, iterative, that you look at hashtags, we validate them, we look at others that can be associated, we validate them again, and this is a manual process. We cannot do all this automatically. So some hashtags, they don't make sense that they come as associated as other hashtags that UN Women was using. So I think this will take at least 4 or 5 weeks just to get the query to filter the data from tweets Twitter right. And after we have that query, we don't know even if the content of the tweets that we have, they are all related with political participation. So we need to do a textual analysis, and if possible, we can at this step triangulate the data, what we see in Twitter data, what we expect to see based on other data. For example, we can use other surveys, or we can use surveys such as Latino Barometer that has some questions related to political participation, and we can, for example, see if there's a correlation between what you see in Latino Barometer and what you see in our Twitter data using the different states in Mexico. So we did all this work a bit on the on a very high level. So we didn't do a lot of detail, but we understood what we needed to be done to do this in a proper way. So we discuss these steps, and so it's also important to describe the universe relevant to tweets and the universe in terms of demographics, to understand the exclusions, to understand questions related to engagement, what type of engagement. Some people can, for example, they can tweet only once using a certain hashtag. Other people can use 2,000 times the same hashtag. So all the balance of the tweets and the tweet contributors in the data set needs to be very well understood. And then when we have that, we apply a model of sentiment. So it was the data scientists who did that using resources that exist already for Spanish. For Urdu in Pakistan was a bit more challenging, but for well-known and mainly European languages, there are very well resources that you can apply to code the data automatically in terms of the sentiment. And then we analyze the trends over time or across region, as I'm going to show next. So, for example, for Mexico, it's just an example of some of the the hashtags that you use to filter the tweets. So, and for Pakistan, this is the Facebook page for Pakistan. And so I'm aware that I may run out of time very soon. So I'm just now maybe explaining what did you achieve. So we have this protocol, and we also have a set of learnings and recommendations. And so this is just an example also of what kind of findings we can see. So this is for Twitter in Mexico. We could see over time what was the volume of tweets with certain hashtags. So we can see the hashtag ni una menos just dominates completely the tweets that are related with political participation. So Ni Una Menos is a social media movement that campaigns against gender-based violence towards women, and started in Latin America and started in Argentina, I think, and then it took off to other regions of the world. So even that this was not hashtag that was promoted by UN Women, it was all the tweets related with women empowerment and equality, they seem to most of them to use this hashtag. And there's also another hashtag that was Demos El Paso. This one was promoted by UN Women. There was a campaign in the International Women's Day in 2015 with the objective of showing steps that the government was taking to help women and girls achieve their potential. So it seems that
Hi, Claudia, sorry I interrupted you. I need to ask you if you could please summarize a bit. We have only 1 minute left before we move on to the next presenter. For all the participants, the presentations will be available shortly online for you to go through them. And I'm very sorry, Claudia, that I had to interrupt you. I'm giving you back the floor now.
Okay, so I have 1 minute left. So this is just an example of we can do. So the previous slide was we can look at trends over time. This slide is that we can look at geographical comparisons. For example, we can have a baseline for 2016 and look at the volume of the tweets in different regions of Mexico and how it changed in 2017. And finally, we had some learnings related with analysis. So now I'm going just to summarize the learnings. So we know that getting historical data, especially from Twitter, is very time consuming, and the data was dominated by certain hashtags that would obscure others that maybe also have relevant information. There's a very high volume of retweets, so 75% were repeated tweets. So it means that the content is just repeated over the data. And we also learned that sentiment analysis reflects the nature of the topic. So when you look at the sentiment, most of these tweets, they have a negative sentiment, not because the users, they are not endorsing gender equality, just because they are hungry about some of the questions related with equality. So if they talk about violence, if they talk about killings, it will make the tweet negative, even if they are not, of course, endorsing it. And we need a contextual interpretation of findings. So we have this in the report. If you're interested, I can maybe share the link with Sophia. And we have like the findings for each one of the data sources, and then finally we have these 4 recommendations. So one of the first recommendation is that you need to understand the bigger picture of data in a country before considering it as a source of evaluation. We cannot just assume that big data, it can be used in any context, and big data should be incorporated in the design of the evaluation from the outset. For example, we can promote use of certain hashtags that will give us will help us to get some information in the midterm or at the end of the intervention. And also big data should precede traditional data when sequencing evaluations, and big data can be shaped in ways that enhance its value. For example, in radio data, we can craft certain radio shows in the way that audiences can participate and ask questions that we pose on here. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer questions you may have now.